Hello, Melissa. It's been, boy, more than a decade since I first met you. When we first met, did you ever think you'd still be here this long?
No. Why am I still in here?
I just don't understand.
You may remember in 2009, Melissa Calusinski was working at a Lincolnshire daycare. She was given 31 years in prison for the death of a 16-month-old who was in her care. Since then, she and her supporters have been fighting back, calling this a wrongful conviction.
It hurts. She doesn't belong there.
She's the kind of person that would take her shirt off her back and help other people. This is my baby. This is my youngest. I just want her home.
I used to work at the Mini Subi daycare. I think it was definitely more than a job to her. The kids were her #1 priority. I feel like the kids brightened her day.
Do you believe that Melissa Calusinski had anything to do with Ben Kingan's death?
Zero. She had nothing to do with it. I am Melissa Calusinski's current attorney. She loved Ben. Ben loved her.
And what she told the police was that she threw him to the floor.
You threw him on the floor?
Yeah.
Show us how hard you threw him on the ground.
Went like that.
Did you hurt that baby?
No, I did not. I would never do that.
You got her isolated in a small room with these 2 men for hours.
I never put my hands on them.
She's trying so hard to be the good girl, the compliant girl.
I want to help you guys so much.
She's not equipped to deal with a situation like that.
We're not going anywhere until we get the facts here.
The only way for me to get out was to make a confession, a false confession.
Is there any evidence that corroborates the confession that Melissa made?
Zero.
We would never take someone to trial with just a confession. This child had a fractured skull. There was extensive injuries to this child internally. It's clear that she killed Benjamin.
Do you believe there was a skull fracture?
No. There is no fracture. The evidence had been manipulated.
If I take these sliders here, you can manipulate this photo. So somebody went in and they altered the contrast to make it look like that on screen.
Somebody took x-rays that were completely clear and turned them into unreadable images.
Yes, I can't think of an innocent explanation.
So you're saying that either the prosecutor's office or the coroner's office, but somebody representing the state did this?
Yes.
Yes.
A former daycare worker convicted of killing a toddler tries again today to be released from prison.
Her case was before the Prisoner Review Board in an effort to get clemency.
People have to know the truth. I have to keep pushing, fighting, no matter how much it hurts. I want people to know I'm innocent.
Melissa Calusinski has served 16 years of a 31-year prison sentence for the death of Benjamin Kingan, a 16-month-old whom she cared for at an Illinois daycare center. She has long insisted she is innocent.
This is not where I belong. I'm going to continue to fight no matter what, because I did not do this.
We've been covering this case for more than a decade, and over the years, Melissa's appeals have failed. But she and her attorney, Kathleen Zellner, are not backing down. Now they're taking their fight out of the court system and straight to the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and his prisoner review board.
We're asking them to declare that she's actually innocent and release her. We are also saying commuter sentence.
The story began on January 14, 2009. Melissa, then 22 years old, was working as a teacher's assistant at the Mini-Subi daycare in Lincolnshire, an affluent suburb of Chicago. Ben Kingen attended daycare there, along with his twin sister and their 2 older siblings.
I came to work and I saw Ben. He was fine, normal, happy, playful.
Late that afternoon, after the kids were fed a snack and cleaned up, Melissa says she put Ben down on the carpet and he crawled into his bouncy seat on the floor.
He's sitting in his bouncy chair, playing with his blanket, and he was starting to kind of fall asleep, which was normal.
The teacher working with Melissa stepped out of the room briefly, leaving Melissa alone with the children. That's when Melissa says she noticed something wrong with Ben.
He didn't look right. I took his little hand and I touched his hand and I'm like, Ben, Ben. He did not wake up at all. I saw orange foam coming out of his nose and I'm sorry.
Melissa called for help. Her older sister, Crystal Calusinski, also worked at the daycare at the time.
I hear on the intercom, "Someone help me, help me, help me." I ran in, then started CPR immediately.
What's that like for you, Crystal?
I dream about it a lot. Like I see it in my, my head.
911 was called.
I have a child who's foaming, who's not breathing.
Paramedics responded. Ben was taken to the hospital. He was pronounced dead an hour later.
Me and my sister fell to the floor and we're just bawling. What happened to him and how? I don't understand.
An investigation was launched. According to this police report, during an autopsy, the pathologist, Dr. Yupil Choi, told a detective that he observed a skull fracture, extensive bleeding inside Ben's head, and that the injury was caused by another person using strong force within hours prior to Ben's death. And yet, Ben had no cuts or obvious wounds on the outside of his body, no serious bruises. The pathologist listed the autopsy as pending further studies. Police brought in the daycare workers who had been with the toddler on the day of his death.
Somebody did something.
Determined to find out what happened to Ben. After Melissa was read her rights,
It's routine and protocol for us.
detectives began pressing her for answers.
I have a good idea that you've seen what happened or you were involved with what happened because you were the only one in the room at the onset of this.
Melissa denied over and over again, more than 60 times, doing anything to Ben.
I never put my hands on him. I did not drop him.
But the detectives didn't stop.
You're there. It's not like there were 50 people in that room with you.
All these years later, Melissa still remembers what it was like being in that room.
They weren't listening to anything I said.
After 9 hours under pressure and without an attorney, Melissa changed her story. She said she thought if she told the investigators what they wanted to hear, they would let her go home.
We're not going anywhere until we get the facts here.
The only way for me to get out was to make a confession, a false confession. I wasn't thinking at all.
You weren't thinking of the consequences of doing something like that?
No, all I could think about was just going home.
He starts acting up and you get mad at him and you throw him on the floor.
You throw him on the floor?
Yeah, really hard.
When Melissa was taken to another station for booking, she repeated the same story to another investigator. After spending 14 hours with police, Melissa Calusinski was arrested for the murder of Benjamin Kingen, even though she almost immediately took back the story she told police.
No, I'm innocent.
Melissa's parents, Paul and Cheryl Calusinski, still remember receiving the news.
And I said, what?
Did you think possibly
Not at all.
she had hurt this baby?
Nope.
Nope. She is the kind of person that would never,
Harm anybody.
never put her hand on someone else's child.
But Melissa had told investigators that she did. And after that, the manner of death on Ben's death certificate was listed as homicide. Law enforcement announced they had solved the case.
Ms. Calusinski admitted to police that she had taken the infant boy and thrown him on the ground.
They made her look like a bad person. And she's not that type of a person.
Melissa's family would make it their mission to clear her name.
My parents sold everything that they had.
I put all my effort into getting her free.
They had no idea how much of a fight they were in for.
He was a very healthy baby, just a happy, happy little boy.
In November 2011, nearly 3 years after the death of Ben Kingen, Melissa Calusinski went on trial for murder. The state argued that Ben was a perfectly healthy toddler leading up to his death. Matthew DiMartini and Stephen Scheller prosecuted the case.
How would you describe what the parents have gone through?
When somebody takes your child from you, I don't think that there's any word to describe what they have gone through.
Dr. Choi, the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, testified about that skull fracture he said he had seen and how he believed the child's injury was recent and consistent with having been thrown to the floor by someone. But Melissa's trial attorney, Paul DeLuca, told the jury about a head injury Ben had previously received. It was noticed at the daycare 3 months earlier.
Melissa was not even working there at the daycare center.
After Ben's death, multiple people, including daycare teacher Nancy Callinger, told investigators about it.
We called the mom called the doctor.
But prosecutor Stephen Scheller argued that the earlier injury was insignificant.
The pediatrician actually examined Benjamin's head. It felt around, said there was no issues, that mom should just keep an eye on him. Ben never had an issue after that.
That's not what defense experts said. They noted that after the injury, there were possible signs of head trauma. Medical records showed that in the days after the injury, Ben was lethargic and had a persistent fever. And another daycare employee, Holly, who asked that we identify her by her first name only, testified for the defense about the last time she saw Ben, 2 days before his death.
Melissa walked into the room and she was holding Ben and she said, like, he's not feeling well. And it was almost immediately after she said that he threw up like everywhere.
The next day, 1 day before he died, Ben was kept home from daycare. Prosecutor Matthew DiMartini argued it was a stomach bug or a winter cold.
He was given Pedialyte and put to bed. He woke up the next day and he was fine.
But the defense maintained that Ben's prior injury was so serious that any new impact could have had major consequences. And Ben did have a habit of throwing his head back.
He would be sitting on the ground and he would just kind of lunge his body backwards and hit his head. You know, I guess you'd call it like he was a headbanger.
Nancy Callinger recalled that Ben had done that twice on the day of his death.
I put him on the floor And he immediately threw himself on the floor. And then I walked towards the sink, and he threw himself again.
Prosecutors insisted that Melissa had hurt Ben,
This child did not explode or implode on his own.
and they pointed to her confession.
She became frustrated holding Ben. She threw him to the floor.
Prosecutors told the jury that the fall was so severe it caused that skull fracture. At trial, they mentioned a skull fracture more than 30 times. But was there one? Well, most of the experts who testified from both sides agreed there appeared to be a fracture in autopsy photos. One defense expert said she couldn't say for sure. And according to Melissa's attorney, Paul DeLuca, the x-rays the prosecution had provided before the trial were unreadable.
Before trial, I said, do we have any better images? And it was no.
The state's final witness, pathologist Dr. Manny Montez, gave the most vivid and damaging testimony at trial. He said he examined the body and felt the fracture with his bare hands.
Dr. Montez said he put his finger in the skull and through the fracture. I mean, it was devastating.
The jury deliberated for 7 hours before convicting Melissa Calusinski of aggravated battery of a child and first-degree murder.
My heart sunk. I know I didn't do this.
Melissa's family remained determined to prove her innocence.
I didn't accept the verdict. I knew it was wrong.
And in 2012, a year after the conviction, Dr. Thomas Rudd, the then newly elected Lake County coroner, agreed to review the autopsy evidence at the urging of Melissa's trial attorney.
I saw a membrane, and I thought, my God.
What do you mean when you say you saw a membrane?
You see a scab, similar to what forms on your skin, except it's in the brain.
This is a slide of a part of this infant's brain.
Correct. By definition, if you have a membrane, you have an old injury.
At Melissa's trial, Dr. Choi had told the jury he observed no sign of an old injury. But according to Dr. Rudd, Dr. Choi had simply missed it. He called in Dr. Nancy Jones, a well-regarded pathologist, for a second opinion. And she agreed with Dr. Rudd and noted that the old injury had been healing for about 2 or 3 months, a time frame consistent with that bump on Ben's head that was noticed at daycare.
How they let that go is beyond me.
Like the defense experts at trial, Doctors Jones and Rudd believed that the old injury was further exacerbated by Ben's headbanging.
The added fluid of the recent injury pushes that brain down and shuts down the breathing system. That is the cause of the child's death. It was the old injury. The old injury was massive.
Dr. Rudd phoned the now retired Dr. Choi, who signed a sworn affidavit conceding that he had missed that Ben had suffered an old injury. But he crossed out the word significant, and when asked if he would have changed his testimony at trial, Dr. Choi said no.
There's no indication that anything in there is significant.
But Dr. Rudd suspected that Dr. Choi may have also been wrong about another major issue in the case, that alleged skull fracture.
What should have been done was that whole section should have been cut out to look under the microscope to see if, in fact, it is a skull fracture. And they didn't.
Dr. Rudd believed what Dr. Choi and the other medical experts thought was a skull fracture may have instead been a normal part of Ben's growing skull, but he couldn't prove it. Then in 2015, Melissa's father said he received an anonymous call that there was a set of x-rays at the coroner's office that had never been turned over to the defense. When Dr. Rudd's staff searched the computer archives, they came across these startling images that were never shown at trial.
I was dumbfounded. There's definitely no skull fracture here. I've shown this to various pathologists and a radiologist. They've all called me and say there's no skull fracture in this child at all.
In 2015, 4 years after Melissa Calusinski's conviction, and shortly after those clear x-rays of Ben Kingan were found, Dr. Rudd changed the manner of death on Ben's death certificate from homicide to undetermined. By this point, defense attorney Kathleen Zellner had taken on Melissa's case.
I don't know of a case in America where someone's serving a 31-year prison sentence for a death that was undetermined.
Zellner, who has built a career on getting the wrongfully convicted out of prison, was intent on getting Melissa's conviction overturned. And in 2016, Melissa was granted an evidentiary hearing to present what Zellner argued was new evidence before Judge Daniel Shaines, the same judge who presided over Melissa's trial.
The new evidence was that the images that had been given to Paul DeLuca had been darkened.
Remember, the state gave Melissa's trial attorney, Paul DeLuca, a disc containing these dark, unreadable x-rays before trial. At the evidentiary hearing, Dr. Rudd testified about finding the clear x-rays that he and other defense experts said showed no skull fracture, x-rays that Zellner argued would have changed the outcome of Melissa's trial.
The skull fracture was the pivotal point in the state's case to convince the jury it was a homicide.
But at the evidentiary hearing, prosecutors argued that this wasn't new evidence in the case. They said the disc provided to DeLuca had software that could enhance the x-rays and that he simply didn't do enough to brighten them. DeLuca says he couldn't even open the software.
I call in a secretary, call in somebody else in the office. No one could get any better images.
Zellner, with the help of an imaging expert, argued that it didn't matter what DeLuca did, that the x-rays that he had been given had been modified and were inferior to the ones on the coroner's office computer. She also called a witness whom she believed raised more questions about the prosecution's case, Paul Foreman, the deputy coroner during Ben Kingan's autopsies. Foreman disputed the testimony of one of the most important witnesses at Melissa's trial, Dr. Manny Montez. Remember, Dr. Montez was the state's final witness who testified that he felt a fracture in Ben Kingan's skull. But Foreman, who said he was there when Montez came to the coroner's office, testified that Montez never physically examined Ben's body or actually touched the child's skull.
Could he have somehow gone in and looked at Ben's body, examined the body without you knowing?
No, I was with him from the moment he came in the door to the moment he left.
The state tried to discredit Foreman by questioning his memory as well as his mental health. Foreman told us he had been treated for bipolar disorder and depression.
Well, it was a personal attack.
But Foreman wasn't the only defense witness who raised questions about Dr. Montez's testimony. Dr. Robert Zimmerman, a renowned pediatric neuroradiologist who examined the readable x-rays, testified that if that skull fracture had existed, it would be clearly visible.
It wasn't there on the x-ray, so I don't think he could have actually seen it.
But prosecutors stood by their trial witnesses, Dr. Montez and Dr. Choi, who said they saw and felt a skull fracture. We reached out to both doctors for this broadcast, but they did not respond to our request for comment. When the evidentiary hearing ended, Judge Shaines ruled against Melissa.
She was dealt a devastating setback today in court. That's when a judge ruled she would not get a new trial.
In his ruling, Judge Shaines stated that he didn't find Paul Foreman's testimony regarding Dr. Montez credible, and he agreed with the state that Paul DeLuca could have brightened the x-rays and made them readable. It was another letdown for Melissa and her family.
You clearly made a mistake.
I just don't understand.
Zellner appealed the ruling, but again, a disappointment. And then, 4 years later, in 2022, there was a development that few saw coming. Eric Reinhardt, a new state's attorney in Lake County, the county where Melissa was convicted, had taken office. Zellner says he wanted more information on the discrepancy over the x-rays. So he recommended she retain the digital forensics company, Garrett Discovery.
We paid for him, but he recommended him.
Andrew Garrett is the CEO of Garrett Discovery. Brian Bowman is a digital forensics expert who works for him. They concluded the x-rays were manipulated by someone using a software tool used to view x-rays.
How did Paul DeLuca, the defense attorney, end up with these very dark pictures?
I can show you. So if I take these sliders here and I drag them all the way down or all the way up, you can manipulate this photo. So somebody went in and they altered the contrast to make it look like that on screen and then exported that file.
On the coroner's computer.
On the coroner's computer.
Bowman agrees there was little DeLuca could do.
The defense counsel could have adjusted some of the contrast on the JPEGs that they were given, but they couldn't make the images bigger, and they wouldn't be able to go in and zoom into the depth and have the clarity of the image that the original is.
But if Ben Kingan's x-rays were manipulated, who did it? In their report, Garrett and Bowman pointed to the state.
You put in here, the state adjusted the settings of the images that resulted in black, washed out images. You're saying that either the prosecutor's office or the coroner's office, but somebody representing the state did this.
Yes.
Yes.
This is not a kiosk computer sitting in a lobby. This is in their custody and control. You have to be in the coroner's office to get access to this.
What do you make of Garrett Discovery's findings? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
In late 2022, when Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt met with the forensic experts he recommended, and learned of their findings, attorneys Kathleen Zellner and Paul DeLuca were also there.
Eric was just indignant. He was saying whoever had done this manipulation should be held accountable. I believed after the meeting that he believed in Melissa's innocence, and he was going to try to rectify this.
I thought he was going to do something about it.
But nothing happened, say Zellner and DeLuca. And as the months stretched on, Zellner decided to also look more closely at Melissa's confession.
That's the only evidence against her. There's nothing that tips this as being a homicide, absolutely nothing.
Zellner asked Dr. Saul Kasson, a psychology professor and leading expert on false confessions, to review the case. Dr. Kasson had first analyzed the interrogation back in 2016, when he was a CBS News consultant. He told us then and now that it appears police went into that room determined to get a confession.
The reason that we were called in this incident is because Ben's skull was fractured. What we need to know right now is if this was done by accident or did somebody intentionally hurt him.
Yeah, I would never put my hands on it.
Her denials were emphatic,
I've never put my hand on the child, ever.
and they plowed over all of them.
And you know what? Medical evidence, it just doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Okay?
Remember, a detective reported that during the autopsy, the pathologist, Dr. Choi, told him that Ben had a skull fracture and that the injury was recent and was caused by another person using strong force.
They did an autopsy on Ben.
Yeah.
we're talking a skull fracture. There's sometimes accidents happen, and I mean, they're unavoidable.
They launch into an accident scenario.
I did not drop him.
Did you lose your patience and hit him?
No.
Did you push him into a wall?
Mm-mm.
After nearly 6 hours with investigators,
You didn't come to work that day with the intent of hurting anybody.
Melissa told them it was an accident.
Did you drop the baby?
I wasn't paying attention. He slipped out of my hands.
But that didn't satisfy the detectives, who had left the room periodically to phone Dr. Choi.
That story you're giving us is a load of
There's no way that would have caused that traumatic of an injury. All you need to do is tell us the truth and we're done.
They're not saying nothing will happen to you, but it's implied.
After 9 hours in that room, the investigators were finally getting Melissa to tell a story that could account for a skull fracture.
You were angry.
I was angry and aggravated.
Show us how angry you were and show us what happened, and let's just get this over with and move on.
Okay. So I got angry.
Yeah.
And I went boom.
I'm gonna tell you something right now. This is very specific.
Okay.
This is gonna leave a specific mark.
Like a fracture.
Then they gave Melissa a scenario of why she got angry.
We think in this situation, the other babies are screaming, crying.
And what she did.
He starts acting up, and you get mad at him and you throw him on the floor.
You throw him on the floor?
Yeah.
She needs to get out of there. She can't take it anymore.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, we understand.
The detectives who interrogated Melissa did not respond to our request for comment. Dr. Casson raises concerns about how long Melissa was in that room, approximately 10 hours, and how particularly vulnerable she was. About 2.5 years before Ben Kingan's death, Melissa had reported she was raped.
She was enclosed in a small space, pinned down and sexually assaulted. Now she's pinned into the corner of her room. I can only imagine that while this would be normally stressful for the average person, it would be even more stressful for somebody with that history.
The defense recently had Melissa evaluated by a psychologist and psychiatrist. They diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder. They also assessed her as having borderline intellectual functioning. She scored at a 4.8 grade level in sentence comprehension, which could help explain why she believes she could go home, even after she had confessed to murder.
I'm just kind of curious how much more.
Not much longer. We're on the phone right now. We're trying to get this done as quickly as possible.
Because I just want to go home and spend time with my parents and my puppy.
She had no idea what was happening. The confession, in my mind, is worthless. There are multiple reasons why she might have given this confession. This isn't just a vulnerable suspect. It isn't just interrogation tactics that are highly deceptive. It's both.
The jury at Melissa's trial heard about her low IQ, but the judge would not allow a false confession expert to testify. Zellner believes that testimony might have changed the verdict.
If Melissa Calusinski had not walked into that room as she had insisted on an attorney, would she be imprisoned today?
No, absolutely not. They had absolutely nothing. There's no eyewitness, there was no video. The reason Melissa Calusinski got charged is she confessed.
But if Melissa didn't harm Ben Kingan, what happened to the toddler? It raises more questions about that earlier injury, the one that was discovered at the daycare months before his death. Several employees there remembered a co-worker.
She was working there, and at the time that happened, her name was Brenda. What I believe, I only heard, I didn't see anything, is that she put him in the crib, and I believe he threw himself back. She quit the day after.
Brenda didn't testify at Melissa's trial, and the defense was never able to track her down. But we did.
A number of people have said that Ben was hurt when he was with you.
Melissa Calusinski was interrogated for hours about the injury Ben Kingen received just before his death. But what about the daycare worker who was reported to be with Ben a few months earlier when he got a lump on his head? She didn't return our calls, but when we located her, she agreed to speak to us on the condition we obscure her face and identify her only by Brenda, her first name.
On October 27, 2008, there was a report of an injury on Ben Kingen. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
The way it's been described is, from some people, is that Ben was with you and you were putting him in the bed. They heard a bump, and then he had a bump on the back of his head.
No.
Did that happen with you?
No.
But you did stop working the very next day?
I did. I was just kind of tired of being there. I don't recall a bump, and I don't recall ever bumping him.
So do you say it didn't happen, or you don't remember it happening?
No, it didn't happen.
Brenda has never been charged with harming Ben, intentionally or accidentally. But attorney Kathleen Zellner is adamant that Ben sustained a serious injury that day.
I think that his parents were misled by the daycare center about that incident.
And according to these police reports, it wouldn't be the first time that the daycare allegedly tried to cover up the seriousness of a child's injury. The daycare was shut down by state authorities shortly after Ben died. In April 2024, more than 12 years after Melissa's conviction, with no success in the court system, Zellner filed this clemency petition, asking Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to exonerate Melissa or release her for time served.
I believe this is her best chance for freedom.
Before a scheduled hearing, Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt spoke to an attorney representing Ben Kingen's family. And then he wrote this letter to the Prisoner Review Board, stating his office strongly opposes Melissa's clemency petition.
Were you shocked by that?
Totally. I believe he thinks in his heart that she's innocent.
Reinhardt would not do an on-camera interview or speak to us on the record, but in that letter to the board, he stated that there is no new evidence in the case and that Melissa's petition for clemency does not establish innocence. On July 9, 2024, Zellner went before the Prisoner Review Board to make her case for Melissa's freedom.
What we want to do today is focus on who is this person and how did she end up in the position that she's in, convicted of the first-degree murder of a child.
But also they are making an impassioned plea for Ben Kingen's parents.
My name is Angie Kingen, and I am here with my husband, Angie. We are the parents of Benjamin Kingen, who was murdered by Melissa Calusinski, threw him to the ground, fracturing his skull. Because of her actions, Angie and I are adamantly opposed to Melissa Calusinski's release. We continue to read about how there's no justice for Melissa, but where is the justice for Ben, and for Andy and myself, and our surviving children? We hope that you, as the Prison Review Board and the governor, will deny her petition for clemency.
Amy and Andy Kingen declined our request for an interview. Following Amy's statement, Zellner was then given the chance to respond.
There is no question that the death of a child is probably the worst thing that could ever happen to a parent. But the only way that a parent gets closure is with the truth. And the truth has not come out in this case. I know that she is innocent.
After the hearing, it was up to the Prisoner Review Board to make a confidential recommendation to Governor Pritzker as to whether Melissa should be released. If you had a chance to talk to Governor Pritzker yourself, what would you say?
I would say just please look at my case. I didn't do this.
Holly, who worked at the daycare with Melissa, believes her, so much so that she wrote this letter to the governor.
From the time Melissa was arrested for Benjamin's murder, I have always thought she was innocent. The evidence does not point to Melissa. I can only imagine how Ben's family's gonna feel knowing that I'm saying Melissa's innocent. But an innocent person should not be in jail.
When we first met the Calusinski family back in 2014, 5 years after Melissa's arrest, they still had her bedroom set up. Today, that room is still set up just as it was. Paul and Cheryl Calusinski haven't given up hope that their daughter will be home soon.
She's Daddy's little girl. We did everything we can.
And we're just gonna keep on until she comes home.
CBS next Saturday. A young grad student is shot and killed.
It still doesn't feel real.
Was this just a random act of road rage?
It's not a violent crash.
No. Or was it something much more personal?
Whoa.
There's our connection. 48 Hours is all new. CBS next Saturday, 10/9 Central, and streaming on Paramount+.
She doesn't do the in-your-face type of homicidal maniac kind of thing. She's not a shooter, she's not a stabber. But I haven't seen somebody this ruthless in a long time. I've seen a lot of murders. I've seen people killed with knives and machetes and guns, with vehicles, strangulation, suffocation. I have never seen anyone try to kill another person with a piece of cheesecake.
Until now.
Until now. I'm a private investigator here in New York City. I was hired to hunt down and assist in the apprehension of Victoria Nasirova.
As a perpetrator, she's 1 in a million. There was a call from patrol stating that we have a woman, Olga, who's lying in bed, who appears to be under the influence of something, and she's advising that there are items missing from her bedroom. Then she tells me this tale of how this woman, Victoria Nasirova, came to her home.
She arrived with what she described as the best cheesecake in New York.
She says, please have this cheesecake. Olga says, okay, I'll try the piece of the cheesecake. Immediately she felt extremely ill, nauseous, sweaty, dizzy. And she said, I've never felt like that before. I don't know what was going on. She passes out.
Within a very short amount of time, Olga is fighting for her life.
Someone was trying to kill you. Who did you think?
Victoria.
Victoria Nasirova.
Yep.
It's phenazepam in the cheesecake, a sedative primarily used in Russia. Apparently it has no taste, and a little bit too much can produce an overdose.
Victoria found someone that resembled her.
I think she wanted to kill this woman and assume her identity.
Victoria Nasirova is dangerous, arrogant, cunning. I didn't know how dangerous she was until I found out the trail of bodies that she was leaving behind in an unconscious state.
The only thing I remember, I just took one bite of fish and I was out of it in 5 minutes. For a week, I was in the hospital.
Police soon discovered that she was wanted for something far more serious.
This is for murder.
This is for murder right here. I believe that Victoria felt the walls were closing in on her. Victoria Nasirova had to be taken off of these streets.
I'm not a killer. I'm woman. Only woman.
I think anybody that trusts Victoria has something to fear.
She is a very colorful criminal.
In his 20-year career as a New York police detective, Kevin Rogers says he never met the likes of Victoria Nazarova.
Extremely brazen, diabolical.
And even the street smarts of a career cop left him unprepared for what he says she did.
I've never dealt with a case where cheesecake that's laced with poison is utilized.
It started on September 2nd, 2016, with what seemed like a routine call.
It was a call from patrol stating that we have a woman advising that there are items missing from her bedroom.
The woman was a beauty stylist named Olga Svik, who did eyelash extensions at a nearby salon. Patrol officers told Rogers she'd reported items, including purses, had vanished from her home.
Grabbed my partner and we headed out to this woman's house.
She told him she had just returned home from the hospital, where she said she'd been in and out of consciousness with severe dizziness and nausea.
Olga's bedroom is the top right window.
When he got to the scene, Olga, a Ukrainian immigrant, still seemed a bit woozy.
Can you remember at all the police asking you questions?
No, I don't remember.
The only thing she remembered was that a frantic client from the salon had come to her house, a Russian woman named Victoria Nazarova, who had wanted her eyelashes extended in a hurry.
I need an emergency eyelash repair done, please, please, please. Olga said I never have done that before. Every bit of work that I do is in my salon.
Olga had told her client she had no appointments available, but she says Victoria was in the habit of being pushy. She'd repeatedly suggested they spend time together outside of work.
She started acting like she's my friend, you know?
Feeling uneasy, Olga refused Victoria's offers to hang out. And she noticed something else about Victoria, something visually unsettling.
I thought she looked like me.
An uncanny physical resemblance. While Olga turned down socializing with Victoria, she relented to her pleas for eyelash help and told her to come over. Olga's uneasy feeling returned when Victoria showed up at her door with 3 small slices of cheesecake.
It's from like famous bakery, like famous cheesecake.
Olga says Victoria quickly gobbled up 2 of the slices and then insisted Olga try the last one.
Did you eat the entire piece?
Yeah, it's like small piece.
And what happened?
I got sick.
She says she threw up violently.
And then after that, I don't remember anything.
So she tells you this story. What are you thinking?
I'm suspicious.
With Olga acting woozy, Rogers wondered if she was a drug user.
I said to her, I says, Olga, I said, I want to believe you. However, this doesn't add up. But she was adamant. This 100% happened, and this woman is up to something.
In the garbage, Rogers did see something.
I walked over to the waste paper basket, and right there was this plastic container with what appeared to be the remnants of a pastry, something that looked good.
Olga identified it as the cheesecake box. Rogers told his evidence team to bag it and tag it. Whatever had been in that box, Olga said it had made her very sick.
You almost died.
Yeah, I was in coma 34 minutes.
But Olga admits doctors didn't find anything suspicious in her system. Still, she told Rogers she was hospitalized twice. He called the hospitals to confirm, but says they wouldn't divulge patient information.
Which, again, led me to believe that maybe she wasn't telling the truth.
Rogers did try to find Victoria Nazarova, but couldn't.
Well, it sounds like at that point this case is almost over.
Dead.
But a few months later, the case came back to life when Rogers found a new witness, a neighbor of Olga's, who reported seeing a woman visiting her the day after the alleged cheesecake incident.
He told me that a woman had come and gone a few times.
The neighbor said the mysterious woman had told him Olga was sick. And when he went to check on Olga, he walked into a surreal scene and called an ambulance. Her room was like a sauna. Someone had turned the heat on full blast, even though it was a hot August day, and Olga was passed out in the bed, barely dressed.
When she's discovered in this sort of racy lingerie.
Olga was stunned by this detail because she had been wearing sweatpants.
So someone changed you?
Yeah.
Changed your clothes?
Yeah.
And there was more. Pills were strewn all over the floor. Rogers wondered, had someone tried to kill Olga and then staged the scene to make it look like a suicide? Rogers realized that Olga had probably been telling the truth all along.
I do have to make that sort of uncomfortable apology to her of I'm truly sorry for not believing you 100% at first.
Rogers now turned his attention again to finding the suspect in this case, Olga's client, Victoria Nazarova. But where was she? Rogers had no way of knowing that someone else was also trying to find her. His name is Herman Weisberg. He's a private eye and a retired New York City detective. Weisberg was tracking Victoria through ads on Russian dating sites and social media, where he says some of her outreach seemed designed for a niche audience.
She was advertising her services as a dominatrix, you could call it /escort.
He believed Victoria was using online ads to commit crimes of opportunity.
She would knock out with knockout drugs, taking money, watches, jewelry, whatever she can get.
And he suspected Victoria had done something much worse.
Who murdered your mother?
Victoria Nazarova.
With the fog of her mysterious illness behind her, Olga Svick says she went back to work, sharing the story of her harrowing ordeal. That's when another client told her something she never expected to hear.
She said, you know, one of my husband's friend, I think somebody also drugged him. His name is Ruben.
Meet Ruben Borukov.
Hi, Tina, how are you?
About 2 months before Olga ate that cheesecake, Ruben, who ran a nearby dry cleaning business, met a woman on a Russian dating site. Her name, Victoria Nazarova.
She says she's a good cook, and I said I love to eat.
The two arranged to meet at her place for dinner.
I just took one bite of fish, and I was out of it in 5 minutes.
Ruben says he passed out, and Victoria allegedly went on a shopping spree.
She took like $800, maybe $1,000 in my altogether in cash, $2,400 in American Express.
So she's living high on the hog on your money.
Absolutely. And then she brought me here.
2 days later, Ruben was still out of it when Victoria literally took him to the cleaners. One of Ruben's employees took this video.
She was walking here and there and making some stories to my workers. Oh, we had wine. He drank 2 bottles of wine. I don't remember nothing.
As Victoria talks to the workers,
Maybe take pill or something, right?
the camera catches a glimpse of her sitting in the boss's chair. Luckily, Ruben's sister called an ambulance. Victoria would flee the scene before it arrived, but not before cleaning him out.
I had some money in the basement. Couple hundred here. She took it. She took the watch.
And Ruben believes Victoria nearly took a lot more than that.
Did you almost die?
I think so. That's how I was.
Oh, he was a sick man.
But Private Eye Herman Weisberg says when it comes to Victoria Nazarova, Olga and Ruben may have been the lucky ones. In 2017, Weisberg began working with this woman, Nadia Ford. Nadia said her mother, Alla Alexienko, with whom she was very close, had gone missing back home in Russia.
And so every day you would talk to her?
Every day.
Nadia says before her mother disappeared, she had mentioned making a new best friend. The friend's name? Victoria Nazarova. Before Victoria came to New York, she was living in Russia and had become Alla's neighbor in the apartment next door.
Here is your mother standing next to you.
Right.
And here is Victoria.
Right.
And they seem like an odd couple. You just wouldn't think they'd hang out with each other.
She was always trying to be very friendly to her, you know, and my mom, she trusts everyone.
In the fall of 2014, Alla had told Nadia she would be sending her daughter special gifts. Her new best friend, Victoria, would bring them. Victoria would be carrying $6,000 in cash and other valuables, including 2 fur coats, to be hand-delivered to Nadia. But Victoria never showed. And on October 5th, Nadia tried to call her mother, but couldn't reach her.
How many times did you call your mother that day, October 5th?
Oh, a lot. A lot. About 100.
Really, 100 times?
At least. I tried everything.
And she would not answer?
No.
So what are you thinking?
I got afraid because for 8 years, she never happened that she didn't answer the phone. Never.
Nadia says she had found Victoria's sudden friendship with her mom suspicious. And that suspicion only grew when she accessed her mother's cell phone records online.
And I saw the last person who called her, it was Victoria.
The call had come in at 11 p.m., and there were no other calls after it.
And that's it. And then my heart dropped. I just started to have this feeling that something happened.
Something terrible.
Something terrible happened.
Nadia decided she had to go to Russia to find out the truth. About 2 years later, 48 hours went with Nadia to retrace her steps. We brought her back to her hometown of Krasnodar, about 800 miles south of Moscow near the Black Sea, to show us how she launched her own investigation into her mother's disappearance. First, Nadia convinced Victoria to meet her outside her mom's apartment building, where she confronted her. She says Victoria loudly insisted Alla was alive.
And then she ran up the stairs. And then I'm like, where are you going? Why are you running?
And if she runs up here, are you chasing her?
Exactly, yeah.
Nadia told us she notified police and took them inside her mother's apartment.
So when I walk into the apartment...
She quickly realized the place had been looted.
Nothing.
Credit cards gone?
Nothing.
Family heirlooms and expensive jewelry gone.
Everything.
And whoever did this also stole most of her mother's life savings, $40,000 Alla kept in a secret hideaway.
If you take this off,
it was gone.
This.
And as far as Nadia could tell, so was Victoria.
What are the police and the district attorney and what are these people saying to you?
Just wait, she's gonna go. She's gonna come back.
Undaunted, Nadia carried on her search, crisscrossing the country, posting flyers like this one. She pleaded with Victoria by text.
Listen, I give you everything. My apartment, money, you name it. Please just give me my mom back.
Nadia feared she was getting nowhere when she had an idea.
Nadia, where are we right now?
We're in a highway that Victoria had my mom.
She noticed that most main roads had traffic cameras. What if one of them had photographed Victoria the night Nadia's mother went missing?
But you got to get access to these photographs. How do you do that?
It's Russia. You buy things. You have money, you buy things.
Nadia got access to images from local traffic cameras. About 100 miles from the apartment,
that's the camera I see right there.
Nadia hit pay dirt.
That's the camera that showed that my mom was with Victoria.
These are the pictures that changed everything. The pictures look blurry, but Nadia was certain that this is Victoria Nazarova behind the wheel, and equally sure she knew who was sitting in the passenger seat. Her mom.
No doubt in your mind?
No.
What's the date that this picture was taken?
October 5th in the morning, 10 o'clock.
October 5th, the day that you lost all communication with your own mother.
If the picture could be believed, it meant her mother could still be alive.
This camera gave me hope.
Nadia called Russian police about the pictures, and was shocked at their response.
What does the detective say?
He said, I know, I have these pictures.
With investigators now working the case, Nadia says they confirmed Victoria rented this car with these plates, tracked her down, and brought her in for a lie detector test. But before the results could come back, unbeknownst to the cops, Victoria caught the first flight out of Russia.
She cannot get away with this.
With Victoria on the run, Nadia desperately continued her search for her mother, hoping against hope to find her alive.
I dedicated my life to that. I quit everything and everyone. I didn't believe that my mom is not alive.
But hope turned to heartbreak in April of 2015 when she got a disturbing phone call. Charred human remains had been found in a remote area about a 2-hour drive from Allah's apartment. Authorities called Nadia in to make an identification.
I said, no, it's not her, no. It's just remains. And then a few minutes later, I started looking at her teeth.
And you knew it was your mother?
Yeah, so I basically recognized my mom by her teeth.
Behind me is the Russian town of Armavir. It's about 110 miles from Krasnodar. And it's important to this case because it's where Victoria Nazarova grew up. Why is that significant? Because less than a quarter mile from where I'm standing right now is where Allah's body was dumped.
The body was here. Victoria took everything from me, my family, my life, my mom, everything.
By this time, Interpol already had issued an international arrest warrant for Victoria Nazarova in Allah's murder. Nadia went home to Brooklyn, determined as ever to track down Victoria Nazarova. On a whim, she turned to Facebook, and you'll never guess whose face popped up on the screen.
Victoria was posting pictures all over Facebook, checking in at this place, at that place, beautiful life. She flew to Mexico.
Having a great time.
Yeah. From Mexico, she flew to New York.
Nadia reported all this to U.S. police and immigration officials, but they couldn't find Victoria. That's when Nadia started working with private investigator and former New York City detective Herman Weisberg. He combed through Victoria's Facebook profile with an experienced eye for detail.
I never look at what people want me to see on these sites. I'm used to looking at everything except for what's supposed to draw your attention in.
Late at night, Weisberg meticulously studied every photograph and made a remarkable discovery right on Victoria's face.
This particular picture was the most beneficial. She's wearing the Ray-Ban sunglasses that are mirrored, and she took a great picture for us to see the dashboard of the car. But more importantly, the stitching on that back headrest, yeah, that's just black leather with a light gray stitching on it. I decided the next morning I was going to be at a big parking lot at a train station.
He walked row after row of vehicles, peering into windows, hoping to find the make and model that had that stitching.
And it's a big hub for the railroad. So
Hundreds of cars in here.
Yeah, probably thousands all over the place. So it's real easy to look for the kind of detail I was looking for.
Then a Chrysler sedan caught his eye.
So you look inside the car, and what do you see?
All right, it's got the same stitching.
And show me on your phone. There's her mirrored sunglasses.
The stitching over here.
Turns out that only a Chrysler 300 had this stitching and dashboard layout. Now the hard part, finding the specific car Victoria was driving.
Again, this was such a wild goose chase at this point.
But Weisberg saw that a series of likes on Victoria's Facebook page were clustered around Sheep's Head Bay, a Russian neighborhood in Brooklyn.
So you sent some of your investigators to look for one of these Chrysler 300s. Did they have any luck?
Well, yeah, we found a bunch of them. Then the next day, I had somebody run the license plates, and luckily, we found one that came back to a Russian-sounding name.
Weisberg took our 48 Hours crew into the area he searched and called me to the scene when he again found the Chrysler 300 at the heart of this investigation.
This is it?
Yeah.
This is the car?
This is the car, yeah.
Take a look inside. Do you see the stitching?
Yep. It's hard to miss now.
Oh, there it is.
Now you see how unique it is, right?
Yeah. This is only an area of 8.5 million people, and you found the car.
It wasn't a needle in a haystack. You had to find a haystack first.
And when Weisberg went to the address connected to that car, the building looked familiar. Weisberg had seen it before in another one of Victoria's selfies.
When you look at it and you see that telephone pole and the location of that manhole cover and that manhole cover, and if you look over there, you got the telephone pole and you've got the two manhole covers.
This is brilliant, Herman. Through that reflection in her glasses, you figure out this is the apartment building where the man who owns that Chrysler 300 lives. And with Victoria in the picture, you thinking she might be living with this guy?
It looks like she took a selfie there, and it all starts to make sense.
Amazingly, the woman Russian authorities wanted for the murder of Nadia's mother was now living with her boyfriend in Nadia's own backyard.
4 or 5 blocks away.
You gotta be kidding me.
No.
Did you try to go find her?
No.
Why?
Because I would kill her.
We got lucky early on, and we spotted Victoria and her boyfriend out here.
The boyfriend was the owner of the Chrysler 300 and lived in that apartment building. That boyfriend told us that he eventually became one of Victoria's victims himself. He says not only did she steal from him, but that she killed his beloved beagle, Joey.
Apparently, Victoria got very jealous of the dog getting some of the spotlight in their house and decided to poison the beagle, allegedly, on the beagle's birthday. I'm a dog lover, so that stuff.
That guy, I've seen him on TV.
And Joey the beagle's demise didn't sit well with Victoria's neighbors either.
She killed his dog, that bitch. Killed his dog.
Every time you learn something else about this woman, you realize that if she was left unarrested, this could have really ended poorly for Brooklyn.
But now, Weisberg knew the hunt was finally over. He says he called Interpol and Homeland Security, but neither one agreed to take action. So he alerted the NYPD. And on March 20th, 2017, the police made their move. The woman who had once posed as a dominatrix suddenly found herself in handcuffs.
I just cried. I couldn't believe that it's actually happened. It's a miracle.
Detective Kevin Rogers couldn't believe it when his phone rang.
Brooklyn advises us that they had this woman, Victoria Nazarova, in their custody.
Rogers says the cheesecake case suddenly started making sense.
Olga had something that Victoria wanted, and it wasn't money, and it wasn't handbags.
He says the instant he started reviewing police evidence photos, he saw something that made it clear exactly what Victoria was after. This ID of Olga's was found in Victoria's apartment. The picture looked eerily similar to Victoria herself.
I think she wanted to kill this woman and assume her identity.
To back up his theory, Rogers knew he would need to prove that Olga's cheesecake had been poisoned. When he sent the container found in Olga's house to a lab, they found nothing. But when Rogers decided to send it for more extensive testing, he got a hit.
Phenazepam is a sedative primarily used at the time in Russia.
It makes you sleepy.
Yeah, sleepy, then coma, then death.
Rogers learned that phenazepam is especially dangerous in a hot environment. Remember, the heater in Olga's room had been left on high, And Victoria's DNA was on the cheesecake box.
All these pieces of the puzzle, they've come together.
Absolutely.
And so you think this was a planned murder?
Absolutely.
Victoria was charged with attempted murder for the attack on Olga, assault, and grand larceny. Before trial, she agreed to sit down with us at New York's Rikers Island Jail.
Victoria Nazarova?
Yes.
What do you make of Herman Weisberg's investigation? To see more, go to 48hours.com.
We'd heard cruel and colorful stories about Victoria Nazarova for months. So in 2017, when we interviewed her in jail as authorities investigated her for attempted murder in Olga's case.
Victoria Nazarova?
Yes.
Peter Van Sant, please have a seat.
Thank you.
We weren't sure what to expect.
Would you look at this?
Yeah.
This is Allah.
Yes.
She insisted she had nothing to do with the disappearance of Nadia's mother, Allah.
Victoria, did you kill Allah?
No.
You did not?
No.
There's a woman named Olga who looks a lot like you, who claims that you tried to kill her by giving her a piece of poisoned cheesecake. You wanted her dead so you could steal her identity.
Victoria delivered her answer using the careful language of someone with a lot to lose.
Я знаю, о ком ведет речь. Я знаю эту.
I know whom you mean. I know this young woman. I can tell you that.
Я ее не
I did not
заставляла
force her
его
to
есть.
eat it.
You're telling me all of these accusations against you, all of that is false?
Нет, я не.
No, I admit doing a part of it, but I will only talk about it at the trial.
Victoria Nazarova would be in custody for nearly 6 years as the pandemic caused delays.
All right, can we bring the defendant out?
Before she stood trial for the poisoning of Olga Svik. When the case went to court in January of 2023,
the trial of a woman accused of poisoning her look-alike with cheesecake.
The media were watching.
There are elements of this case that you won't find anywhere else. The beautician, the cheesecake.
In all the evidence you have, what is the most important in your opinion?
We're looking at it right here. It's this container.
The cheesecake box from Olga's garbage still has crumbs left inside. Outlandish as it is, Assistant District Attorney Dino Liturgis tells jurors in opening statements,
this is not a joke. It's not just a story.
They should see it as a potential murder weapon.
This defendant intended to kill this woman and steal her identity.
He calls Olga first to highlight the human consequences.
And she's going to explain to you everything that happened to her. Everything that she can remember, of course.
She was poisoned with something that impacted her memory.
Cameras were not allowed to record witness testimony. Olga makes it clear that talking about the details of her ordeal is still like reliving a bad dream. And testifying in front of her alleged attacker traumatizes her all the more.
Was she looking at you?
Oh, yeah, she looked at me.
What did you see on her face, in her eyes?
You know, she's smiling.
She was smiling. She was smirking.
The state also calls Nadia Ford.
I was trying to get her look. Look at me. Look at the person whose mother you killed. Look into my eyes. Remember them for the rest of your life.
The judge has strictly limited prosecutors from going into specifics about the murder charges facing Victoria in Russia. So they're hoping Nadia can finesse the details and still get the point across.
I'll tell you, it was a risky strategy.
What has she told them that you think helps your case?
What she told the jury is that something serious happened in Russia. It's one thing for me to say the crime was serious, and it's another thing for a witness to come in and show with her body language, with her eyes, with her overall demeanor, that this was an incredibly serious crime that Victoria Nazarova was wanted for.
I was staring at her. I just want her to look at me. She didn't look at me once.
I was almost certain in the beginning of the trial that Victoria was going to testify. And I know that she likes to talk.
As it turned out, Victoria declined to testify and answer questions. But something she did say made it into the trial, something she said to me in a part of her 48 Hours interview published online.
It's in evidence. Peter Van Zandt asked this woman in English, there is a woman named Olga.
There's a woman named Olga.
Who claims that you tried to kill her by giving her a piece of poison cheesecake.
Liturgis has someone read Victoria's answer into the record.
Я знаю, о ком ведет речь, я знаю эту девушку.
I know whom you mean. I know this young woman. I can tell you that.
Я ее не
I did not force her to eat it.
I did not force her to eat it?
For me as an individual, she's guilty with that statement.
Where in that answer does she say, I didn't poison anybody?
Miss Nazarova is not guilty of these charges.
But defense attorney Christopher Hoyt doesn't call a single witness to help him prove it. Instead, he argues the spectacle of this case obscures the specifics, details that amount to reasonable doubt.
There's no direct evidence of anyone seeing Victoria Nazarova putting fenazepam in cheesecake.
He reminds the jury Olga's doctors didn't find anything unusual in her system. And he says there was nothing particularly unusual about Victoria's life in New York either.
She's been just living in the U.S., using her normal name.
That's just the point, says the prosecutor. Victoria's U.S. visa was set to expire. She was scared of facing charges in Russia and needed a new identity to help her hide.
There's only two categories of people that need someone else's ID. You have college kids under the age of 21 who want to borrow their buddy's ID to go drink. And then on the other hand, you have international fugitives who need someone's ID as a lifeline to stay in this country and not go back to Russia.
This is not a case about what happened in Russia.
And the defense insists that even if Victoria poisoned the cheesecake, it's not enough to prove she wanted Olga dead.
I submit to you that they have not proven that intent.
This case has more than you need to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant is guilty.
But will the jury agree?
As they file back in, what are you seeing on their faces? When this jury goes off to deliberate, what's going through your mind?
What's going through my mind is that they understand the diabolical calculation that occurred for this crime.
Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz says Victoria Nazarova is a lot smarter and more committed than the average criminal defendant.
It takes patience, and it takes planning.
But it takes the jury in her trial only an hour and a half to reach a verdict.
House say used to count number 1 of the indictment, charging the defendant, Victoria Nazarova, with attempted murder in the second degree. Guilty or not guilty? Guilty.
Guilty of attempted murder in the second degree.
Were there tears?
Yeah.
At sentencing, Olga tells the court her suffering went on long after Victoria's attack.
She caused me to lose trust in people. I have difficulty trust people, and I cannot know for sure what their true intentions are. I am grateful that this person will be punished for what she did to me.
The maximum punishment,
She can stand up.
is 25 years in prison.
You are an extremely dangerous woman. I sentence you to 21 years in jail.
Judge Kenneth Holder decides a 21-year sentence is enough. With credit for time served, Victoria may be out in 15. Even so, she has some choice words for the court as she is led away, barely audible under her mask.
She's a narcissistic homicidal maniac. That's what narcissistic homicidal maniacs say when everything goes bad for them.
Victoria's time behind bars has already been rough. In 2018, at Rikers Island in New York, she was assaulted by fellow inmates and suffered multiple injuries to her face. And when she's done serving her time in America, Victoria faces deportation and murder charges back in Russia.
I know there's great satisfaction for you that Victoria's finally going to prison, but it's not for what she did to your mom. Is that still an emptiness inside for you?
I feel better. At least I know now that for the next 15 years she's not gonna hurt anyone.
Two of the people Victoria has hurt most have resolved to draw strength from each other. Since tragedy unexpectedly brought them together, Nadia and Olga have become the best of friends.
When we met, I feel like I knew Nadia all my life.
She's very kind, very nice, open-hearted, kind of remind me of my mom.
Nadia, she's went through hell.
They seem to know it takes one victim of Victoria Nazarova to truly understand another.
Do you think the two of you will be friends for life?
I think yes.
A beautiful heart, a gentle, gentle spirit.
A woman found dying from a gunshot wound, crime scene evidence that doesn't add up.
There's definitely mysteries involved in this case.
Then prosecutors take a creative approach.
A psychological autopsy.
48 Hours, Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
My name is Carol Dodge, and I am the mother of Angie Dodge, who was brutally murdered in June of 1996. And for 23 years, I've traveled every road there is, turned every stone there is, to find justice for my daughter.
As the officers arrived at the crime scene and found Angie Dodge laying on the ground, and it was obvious that there was a very brutal murder that had happened, a lot of blood. During the investigation, we came across a significant amount of DNA that we believe is from the killer.
Would you say that this crime scene provided really good evidence?
Excellent evidence.
For nearly 2 decades, police could not find a match to the killer's DNA. So in 2014, they went way outside the box and searched a public DNA database owned by Ancestry.com.
It led us to this Michael Essery Jr., who just happened to be a filmmaker.
Films of homicide, kind of a murder mystery filmmaker.
Then he cuts off her head.
My name is Michael Essery. I'm a filmmaker and was a suspect in the Angie Dodge case. Murderabilia.
It was then I knew it was a girl, and she was young.
Got me the reputation of being a person who is really into murder and things like that.
And I shoved her body over in the shower and just kept stabbing her.
It was pretty creepy. We had Louisiana State Police call him.
He had agreed to come down to the state offices there in New Orleans.
The majority of the time that I was in the interrogation room, I just didn't know what they were talking about. They finally had to look at me and go, no, we think that you, Michael Ushery, we think that you're involved in this murder case.
My whole purpose is to find who killed Angie Dodge.
The ability to kill is obviously somewhere in all of us because it happens every day.
Grief has no time limit. I just can't let go. I can't let go of her.
Carol Dodge lost her daughter Angie when she was just a teenager.
She was just discovering who she truly was and wanting independence. She says, just let me grow up. Let me make my own mistakes. You know, you don't need to watch me. You know, you don't need to be my shadow.
It was the summer of 1996 in Idaho Falls, Idaho, a mostly Mormon community where neighbors knew each other by name and doors were rarely locked, says former Chief of Police Mark McBride.
But it was really a very quiet, peaceful town overall.
Just 3 weeks before her death, 18-year-old Angie got her own apartment in this house.
I saw her the night that she was killed. She said, it's so hard growing up. And she laid her head on my shoulder and we just kind of rocked back and forth. And I'm so grateful for that moment. Extremely grateful that my last words were that I love her.
The next morning, Angie didn't show up for work at a local beauty supply store.
We got a phone call at our 911 center about 11 o'clock in the morning. And one of her friends at work came to check on her, and the door was unlocked. She went in and she found a body laying there on the floor in a very bloody crime scene.
There were no signs of forced entry, but there were signs of a struggle.
You think she fought for her life?
Yes, I do.
Angie was stabbed and cut 14 times and left half naked. The killer ejaculated on her, leaving behind what DNA expert Greg Hampikian calls a pristine profile.
It's a single profile, complete identification, one man to the exclusion of everyone on the planet.
Police began collecting the DNA of dozens of local men and spent months interviewing everyone Angie knew, including this young man, Christopher Tapp. Although his DNA didn't match and Tapp denied any involvement, after more than 28 hours of interrogation over 23 days, Tapp confessed to participating in Angie's murder.
You were there, correct?
Correct.
Did you know Christopher Tapp?
No, didn't know. Had no clue.
Tapp told police that the night of Angie's death, he and two friends stopped by her apartment. During an argument, Tapp claimed one of his friends started stabbing Angie while he held her down.
You hold her down, okay, while she's being cut. You hold her down while she's being cut.
But when Tapp went before a judge, he pled not guilty of raping and murdering Angie Dodge.
I said, you beast, you horrible beast. How could he do this to my daughter?
Defense argued Tapp's DNA didn't match the killer's, but on May 28, 1998, it took a jury approximately 13 hours to reach a verdict.
Guilty.
Nearly 2 years after Angie Dodge was murdered, Chris Tapp faced his punishment, with Carol Dodge glaring at him.
You are guilty of the crimes of murder in the first degree and rape.
His sentence, 30 years to life. But the murder of Angie Dodge was still an open case. Chris Tapp did not match the DNA, and he wouldn't tell police who did.
I just couldn't understand why he would go to prison and take a life sentence and not give the other person up.
Tapp did give authorities several names, including someone named Mike.
How sure are you that his first name is Mike? I'm dead positive.
But police could never make a DNA match, so the case went cold, but not for Carol Dodge.
I never stop looking for the actual person who matches the DNA.
By 2009, the killer's DNA had been entered into the National Criminal Database, known as CODIS. But there was still no match. So Carol called well-known DNA expert Greg Hampikian.
I had this message, they don't know who killed my daughter.
By then, there had been many advances in DNA technology. And so, with Hampikian's help, Carol Dodge pushed authorities to use a new controversial search process called familial DNA. It looks for anyone who may be related to Angie's killer.
Which means going into that database in Idaho of the convicted offenders and looking for a family member that might match this DNA partially.
Idaho doesn't allow familial searches in their criminal database, so Hampikian made an even more controversial suggestion: a familial search through public databases.
I'm the one that went to the Idaho Falls Police Department and the prosecution saying, we need to do this.
Imagine you're one of millions of Americans to open up a kit like this, spit into a test tube like this, and then send your DNA off to a commercial database. Well, now that database owns your DNA profile, and you may not realize it, but police may be able to access it.
We're interested in solving a crime, and we're going to use any technique we can that we can legally use.
In the summer of 2014, detectives searched a public DNA database owned by Ancestry.com. They got a hit.
I was told they got 34 out of 35 markers, I believe.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's a good investigative lead.
It was a close enough match to make Detective Patrick McKenna think they had found a relative of Angie's killer. So police got a warrant for Ancestry.com to reveal his identity. It was a man named Michael Usry Sr.
We know it's not that individual, or we would have had 35 out of 35 on that. So that's when we started doing research into the family.
That led investigators to suspect Usry's son, Michael Usry Jr. Detective McKenna wondered if this could be the Mike that Chris Tapp once named.
And then we started researching him, and the films that he was making. It was a little eerie to try to think that that could possibly be a solid suspect in the case.
I have to ask you this question.
Yes.
Do you have a particular interest in murder?
I don't have a particular interest in murder.
It sure seems like it based on your film.
I know it does, but no, I really have quite an aversion to it.
But authorities investigating the brutal murder of Angie Dodge weren't so sure.
precisely at 2 o'clock, three gentlemen came to my door.
In December of 2014, more than 18 years after Angie's murder, Michael Usry Jr. was living in New Orleans when two detectives from Idaho Falls and a Louisiana State Police officer brought Usry to a state police office near the New Orleans Superdome and started grilling him.
They said, "So what about your travels to Idaho? Have you ever been to Idaho?" And I had, in fact, actually went up there with some friends for just one night.
He was 19 years old back then, and he and his friends drove to Rexburg, Idaho, passing right through Idaho Falls.
Well, they were really interested in that.
I'm a little surprised that we were able to actually place him in Idaho Falls.
It was a big red flag for Detective Patrick McKenna.
It's kind of weird, but I just really didn't get it.
Then one of the officers pulled out a warrant and swabbed his cheek for DNA.
At that point, I went, "Hey, what's going on here, you guys? Should I get a lawyer?"
Once they had his DNA, they drove Michael Usry home without any explanation.
I just basically stood on my sidewalk in a daze.
It was a call to a close friend that finally shed some light.
And he said, "Well, what's the case? What is this?" And I go, "Well, they wouldn't tell me anything except that it was a high-profile murder case in Idaho Falls." So he gets on the computer, and within 20 seconds, he's like, "Oh yeah, this is the case right here. It's some girl named Angie Dodge."
The filmmaker whose movie featured a convict describing how he stabbed a woman to death
Watched her insides spill out all over the floor.
was now suspected of doing just that to Angie Dodge.
I mean, it was very much a case of an overkill. They stabbed her and cut her, and it was just a butchery. People were like, "Wow, what does this imply, for your career? For your life, for your family, for your family's name?"
Usry remembers being terrified, spending days holed up at home, worried what police would do next.
Pretty sure that they were tapping my phone calls, possibly staking me out, and certainly checking my computer searches.
But Usry knew he hadn't killed anyone, and he wanted answers. A local newspaper reporter showed him a copy of the warrant investigators used to obtain his DNA. And right there, the answer to the question, why him, dated back about 17 years.
And I went, "Wow, this is because of my dad."
The filmmaker's father, Michael Usry Sr., participated in a genealogy project at his local church. A sample of his DNA went to that public database, which was later purchased by Ancestry.com, and that's where police came across it.
There are 34 out of 35 LLs that match. It seems shocking to me.
34 out of 35 DNA markers sounds like a stunningly close match to Angie Dodge's killer. But the reasons police honed in on him instead of any of his other relatives are detailed in the warrant.
I told you what Mike is his first name, okay?
Remember, Chris Tapp told police a guy named Mike was involved in the murder. Police took to Facebook and found his profile. Bingo. Facebook showed Usry had friends living in the Idaho Falls area. And then there's Usry's films.
And then bludgeons her to death with this very hammer.
The more Usry read, the more furious he grew that anyone would think he was a killer. But even more troubling was the idea that Angie Dodge's killer might be someone in his family.
Just knowing that somebody in my family would possibly do something like that is disturbing. I mean, to say the least,
Michael Usry worried every day. He knew that Idaho Falls police suspected him of murdering Angie Dodge, and the uncertainty of what would happen next kept him up at night. Until January 13th, 2015, more than a month later.
They sent me an email, and it says, Michael Usry Jr., we just wanted to let you know that your DNA did not match our crime scene DNA, something you already knew.
In an email from police, Michael Usry was officially cleared of the murder of Angie Dodge, but he was still thoroughly traumatized.
You were angry at Ancestry?
I was angry at everybody. The police, scientists, these database companies, how could they misfire so bad?
48 Hours asked Ancestry.com about Usry's experience. In a statement, they said they will not share any information with law enforcement unless compelled to by a court order or search warrant. Usry's case, they say, was unique and the only time they have received a formal legal request for DNA-related information. After what happened to Usry, Ancestry.com told us they took action. The public database used by authorities was made private and can no longer be accessed by the public or police.
Can't control fate and what happens to you, so I just figured that there was a reason for this happening.
Michael Usry decided he wanted to try and prevent it from happening to anyone else by making a documentary about his experience. He was shocked when Angie Dodge's mother was willing to talk. What he didn't realize is that Carol Dodge had an agenda of her own.
She's fairly certain that a killer is in my bloodline.
I remember Mike and I sitting down, and I said, okay, Mike, here's a piece of paper. Now I want you to write down from your great-grandfather to your grandfather to your dad. And he did me a genealogy sheet.
My grandfather, he had 6 other brothers. Carol just wonders, hey, maybe it's somebody you don't even know. Maybe it's an illegitimate son of one of your pappy's brothers.
Despite all that, Carol Dodge and Michael Usry have forged a rather odd, close bond.
You're a really special person.
You are too, Carol.
And after hearing Carol and Angie's story, the focus of Usry's documentary changed dramatically to Carol Dodge's search for her daughter's killer. He immersed himself in the case, starting with the man who had confessed, Chris Tapp.
How many times did you stab her before you let go?
That first time.
Usry quickly learned that Chris Tapp was now claiming his confession was forced. And the Idaho Innocence Project, headed by that DNA expert Greg Hampikian, was now working to set Tapp free.
Based on the DNA, is there any way that Chris could have been in that room?
No, not based on the DNA.
The more Carol Dodge learned about DNA, the more she questioned Chris's confession that he held Angie down while she was being stabbed.
It wasn't until I started studying science that I said it's impossible. How could Chris admit in doing what he said he did and there be no physical evidence?
But it wasn't just the science that bothered Carol Dodge. She believed Chris Tapp's confession was coerced by the detectives who interrogated him.
Come on, man. You're the heat of the moment. She's putting up the fight. Do you know you're caught? You're right there in the middle.
I watch it.
Right?
And it's so frustrating.
This was Chris Tapp when we first met. At 40 years old, he'd been inmate number 56265 for 20 years.
You look at that 20-year-old kid, and you realize, God, I was just an idiot.
Think hard about it. I know it's there.
Chris Tapp says his confession was a lie, a story fed to him by police and then forced back out of him on tape.
You can see him specifically pointing out facts to me or giving little innuendos.
This would be the stairs going up. Okay. So you went up these stairs.
Okay. Or hints of how the murder went down.
Well, it's the porch that goes outside.
It all started because Chris Tapp's friend, a man named Ben, who also knew Angie, was arrested in Ely, Nevada for assaulting a woman at knife point. To investigators, the crime seemed similar to the attack on Angie. So while Ben was in custody in Nevada, investigators brought Chris in for questioning.
Emphatically, I said I had nothing to do with it. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm going there. I knew there's no way.
But instead of leaving it at that, Tapp, then just 20 years old, cooperated.
I felt like, trust them, they're not going to do anything wrong.
He doesn't know they can lie to him. And most innocent people have no idea that the interrogators can lie to you.
First, Tapp was told there was irrefutable evidence that his friend Ben killed Angie and that Tapp was there when it happened.
I'm pretty sure we know what happened and who did what, how, when, where, and why.
Tapp kept denying all knowledge of the crime.
Did you hear her scream or anything like that?
I wasn't there.
But detectives persisted, and even though he had a lawyer, Tapp kept talking.
And so when they offered you a polygraph, seemed like a good idea?
Yeah, seemed like a great idea. I had nothing to hide, no reason not to do it.
But Tapp was told he was being deceptive, and detectives promised him full immunity, no jail time, in exchange for the truth, as long as he hadn't participated in the actual murder. That's when Tapp says he started telling police what he thought they wanted to hear.
No, are you sure Ben's there?
Yes. You're positive?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Tapp told detectives he was there when Ben killed Angie Dodge.
You told him don't do it. Yeah. Okay, so did he have the knife then? Pardon?
But just hours later, detectives learned that Ben did not match the killer's DNA. A desperate Chris Tapp started changing his story, blaming several other friends for the murder.
I continued to lie. I continued to give them story after story, and they should have just stopped. But they didn't.
But Chris, why didn't you stop?
I didn't think I could.
When none of the men he named matched the DNA, Tapp says police still refused to let up. After 23 days and 7 interrogations, Chris Tapp confessed to participating in Angie's murder, and authorities voided his immunity agreement.
You hold her down, okay, while she's being cut. You hold her down while she's being cut.
That's what was the end of it all. That's what brought me to prison.
Authorities have repeatedly dismissed Tapp's claims of a forced confession until an astonishing discovery would change the game. Never before seen videotapes of 7 polygraph exams administered to Chris Tapp. Tapes that convinced even Carol Dodge that Chris Tapp is innocent.
Chris Tapp basically just got railroaded.
Carol Dodge took on a new mission to free the man convicted of her daughter's murder and find the killer who left his DNA, even if it turned out to be a member of Michael Usry's family.
You always gotta have a little faith, gotta have a little hope. I haven't accepted this as my end.
I can't imagine spending one day in prison, let alone 20+ years.
Mike Heavey is a retired Superior Court judge who believes so strongly that Chris Tapp is innocent, he spent the last 4 years trying to prove it.
When you look at the interrogation videos, he knows nothing.
So, Chris Tapp, Ben.
He struggles.
Let it out.
For details.
Let it out. You're there.
Why? Because he wasn't there.
Heavey runs a wrongful conviction project called Judges for Justice and took on Tapp's case after watching the interrogation tapes.
I wasn't there. I wasn't even down the stairs. I wasn't nowhere around.
Judge Heavey became convinced that Chris Tapp had been coerced into changing his story an astounding 6 times and knew that something was missing.
I was concerned. He went from one day saying,
I wasn't there.
And the next day,
You're standing above her like this, like her head's right here. Yeah.
I'm at the crime scene and I stabbed her. I couldn't see how he made that jump. So I went back to look at the polygraph and my jaw just dropped.
Does it help to say that I'm nervous?
In between Chris's 9 interrogations, detectives administered 7 polygraph exams. All of them were recorded, but no one had ever bothered to look at the tapes because polygraphs are inadmissible in court, and the sound is barely audible.
Polygraphs are typically used to assess the credibility of the witness when they're done honestly.
And how was the polygraph used in this case?
This case was used to trick Chris Tapp into giving false testimony. Our polygraph expert says it was used like a psychological rubber hose to get him to implicate himself in the murder of Angie Dodge.
Judge Heavey says that detectives in the case broke the rules in the polygraph room and thought no one would ever notice.
The United States Supreme Court has held that it's improper to threaten. You can't threaten because it leads to false confessions. They threatened him with the gas chamber, being accessory to murder, and being a conspirator to murder.
You're an accessory to murder. That's being charged just like the person did. They get life in prison, gas chamber.
They figured no one's going to look at the polygraphs, so it'll be hidden. No one will ever see it.
Heavey says Chris Tapp was brainwashed.
I'm scared. I'm scared. The reason why is because you subconsciously remember.
Chris Tapp eventually comes to believe that the polygraph is an all-knowing scientific instrument that can read his subconscious and is telling the machine that he was at the crime.
Nature. I wouldn't say this about nature. You got trapped.
Chris finally says, yes, I stabbed her because Ben threatened me. And then Chris said,
did I do it?
The police officer walks over and says, give me your hand, like he passed the polygraph. And that gets Chris Tapp 30 years to life, charged with the death penalty. Ugly stuff.
Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, scared. I'm scared. That's pretty much the day my life ended.
But Tapp never told anyone about what happened during those polygraph exams.
I didn't know what they did in the polygraph tapes was wrong. I didn't know. If I would have known these things 20 years, 15, 10 years ago, then maybe we wouldn't be here today.
Idaho Falls police deny any wrongdoing
I don't remember seeing them.
in their interrogations or polygraph exams.
Do you think the polygraph was used as a coercive tool?
I don't know that was the intent. I think the intent is to find out the truth.
Over the years, the courts have upheld Tapp's confession as valid and admissible and not the product of coercive police conduct.
I don't think they were trying to cause harm. It wasn't any malicious intent, I don't think.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around what the police are thinking.
John Thomas is Chris Tapp's appellate attorney.
It's okay. You made a mistake. Just say, hey, I made a mistake. We got the wrong guy. Let's all rally around and let's get the right guy.
Mike Heavey was hoping that the newly discovered polygraph tapes would be enough for a judge to grant Chris Tapp a new trial.
Those polygraph videos are now new evidence. They're the wedge to get Chris in front of a judge to see the coercion that went on.
I hope he walks out a free man.
It's not often you hear the mother of a victim say that about the only man serving time for her daughter's murder.
True.
It was March 2017, and Chris Tapp was just 2 weeks away from 2 hearings that his lawyer, John Thomas, hoped would set him free.
We have too much evidence showing that Chris Tapp wasn't there.
Have you ever found DNA that matched Chris Tapp at the scene?
No.
But Police Chief Mark McBride maintained that given Tapp's confession, the absence of his DNA at the crime scene proved nothing. Then, in a stunning turn of events, the district attorney's office wanted to make a deal. Tapp's murder conviction would stand, but the rape conviction would go away, and there would be no probation.
Chris Tapp would just take his lumps on his 20 years and walk a free man.
Victory!
Tapp took the deal. That was in 2017. 2 years later.
I've got a full-time job, I'm married. I've actually become that productive member of society that I truly thought I could become.
Meanwhile, Carol Dodge never stopped hunting for Angie's killer.
I've done a lot of research on technology, and I was bound determined I was going to solve my daughter's case.
Not long after Chris's release, Carol got some help. New Police Chief Bryce Johnson says he already had his sights set on Angie's case.
I talked to all the detectives, and I kind of told them, let's not worry about what's been done over the past 23 years. We have one mission, it's to find out who left this DNA sample.
It wasn't easy, but 2 years later, there was news.
Today we are here to share developments in the homicide investigation of Angie Dodge.
On May 16, 2019,
Thank you, and thank you for being here.
Chief Johnson told the world they had finally found and arrested the man who matched the DNA.
Carol inspired us all to try harder and to do better. The thing about Carol is she knew more about DNA than I knew about DNA.
What Carol knew is that this woman,
good afternoon,
C.C. Moore, and a company called Parabon Nanolabs had been making huge strides in solving cold cases using genealogy and public databases.
This is our 56th case this year at Parabon using genetic genealogy to identify unknown suspects and victims.
Moore and Parabon were able to generate an even more complete DNA profile of Angie's killer than ever before. That profile could now be uploaded to a large public DNA database called GEDmatch, a free website that allows people to upload their own DNA profiles in search of relatives. In return, if users opt in, their data can be accessed by law enforcement.
When we upload that data, we get a list of people that share significant amounts of DNA with the unknown suspect.
Moore found a family tree that she was confident contained a killer, and it was Michael Usry's family tree.
He apparently was a split off of the Usry family from something like over 100 years ago.
So we're talking about right family tree, but the branch is way off on the other side.
Way off, yeah.
Did you know anything about this sort of offshoot of your family?
No, totally not.
Now Detective Sage Albright and Captain Bill Squires were laser focused on the men in this way off branch of Usry's family tree.
It had been whittled down to a list of persons that I think was around 10 or 11 people that we were able to reduce down further just because they weren't in Idaho at the time, or they were 3 years old at the time.
Left with 6 possible suspects, detectives had to secretly collect their DNA, following them around for days, waiting for discarded cigarette butts, soda cans, or plastic straws. One guy was a tobacco chewer.
The detectives came out, kind of scooped that up. We sent it off to the lab, came back negative. It wasn't the person we're looking for.
Then they started running out of men, and a fear set in.
The thing we were concerned about, is there a child out there that nobody knows about, right? Did someone have a baby and it's not in the genealogy record?
They were right, and this obituary miraculously led C.C. Moore to a missing Usry. This woman, Helen Darnell, had a daughter who was once married to an Usry. After their divorce, a son was born under a different last name, Brian Drips.
When we looked at that name, we realized we had talked to him in the first days of the investigation. He lived across the street from Angie.
I literally said, "You got to be kidding." Brian Drips, he was right across the street. That it took me 23 years when they had it in the first 25 pages of the investigation.
The police report indicates that the day of Angie's murder, a young police officer who was canvassing the neighborhood had briefly questioned a then 31-year-old Brian Drips.
Everyone in that neighborhood got a knock on the door.
Drips denied any knowledge of the crime, and police never asked for his DNA. About 7 weeks after the murder, Drips left Idaho Falls. He was living in Idaho, about 300 miles away, when a cigarette butt linked his DNA to the crime, and detectives picked him up for questioning.
It was obvious he was nervous. He put on a pretty good game face, but his hands started to shake.
For several hours, Drips denied any involvement in Angie's death.
And then when we told him, "Oh, we have your DNA at the crime scene," there was a noticeable change in his demeanor, and eventually he told us that he had been involved.
Detective Albright says Drips also reported that he acted alone. That meant Chris Tapp could not have been there. 2 months after Drips was arrested, Tapp was back in court.
There's clear and convincing evidence the defendant was convicted of a crime for which he did not commit.
This time to be fully exonerated. This case is the world's first exoneration by way of genealogical DNA testing.
I'm extremely happy for him. I hope that he can piece together his life again.
But Usry says he still has doubts about the use of genealogy.
Kind of a scary thing to me to think about what this world is going to be like if all of our genetic codes are in a computer database. Once it's in a computer, that's almost like more permanent than carving something in stone nowadays. But I think that we really, really need to be cautious and take a step back and look at this technology.
Carol Dodge disagrees.
Without technology, without genealogy research, we would have never found Angie's killer. It is the key that opens the door to justice.